One. Welcome to Furthering Christendom. I'm your host, Tyler McNabb, and I have a very special guest with us today, uh, Dr. David Bentley Hart. How are you doing today?
I'm fairly well. How are you?
I'm doing all right, thank you. It's been, I guess, a few months now since we last saw each other. I think we saw each other at the beginning of winter, and now winter is edging out. So I hope you're doing
Well,
well.
I don't. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I think the temperatures are dropping again next
Okay.
week. So,
Well, when I'm moving to Vietnam, and that's the one thing I'm gonna definitely miss. I'm gonna miss the cold. So it's already like in the 80s there. So next week I'll be in the 80s as you freeze, I suppose. So yeah, you have a new book, a new translation of the Tao Te Ching coming out, and it's really exciting. And I've been able to read it and to go through it, and it's really good. And so I figure we can just talk about that. And so you mentioned something very interesting in the introduction. You mentioned that you were raised Christian. You have this really funny line where you're like, "I was raised Christian or Episcopalian," um,
anyway, yeah,
and you
which is an unfair remark because they were very sort of devout. Like my very devout father, who was an Episcopalian, and in his youth, even considered the priesthood. So,
Oh
you know,
wow.
yeah.
But you said you didn't really kind of like investigate or kind of really dive deep into your faith until you had a grand tour of Asia. So I assume this is an intellectual grand tour, and so I thought maybe you could just speak to this a little bit more.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's not that I was totally incurious about Christian tradition, but it was simply my congenital situation at that time. What actually got me into religious studies and into a genuine interest in the mystical and philosophical, metaphysical traditions of Christianity was discovering all of these dimensions of religion in general, and that came mostly by way of a very early interest in Asian, and I mean both East Asian and South Asian traditions and religions and literatures. That's been with me really, I think, since late childhood, I would say, or at least my early teens. And the Upanishads, for instance, the Upanishads, I should say, I had a profound influence on me in the Bhagavad Gita and all that, but also came into contact early on with with the Tao Te Ching and with Taoism in general. I might have discovered Chuang-Tzu before the Book of Lao Tzu. I'm
Hmm,
not sure.
interesting.
Um, and part of it, I mean, just as a boy, it came one volume in particular. I think was Lin Yutang's big
Mhm.
anthology, "The Wisdom of China and India," which uh, is a text from a different universe now, I suppose. But there was a time when books like this were produced and bought and popular, and I had a copy when I was very young, and it was a treasured volume of mine. But yeah, it's true. I found my way into a deeper engagement with my own Christian tradition
Hmm.
by way of this circuitous um, journey through the East, through the traditions of the East, which made me better prepared, I think, to understand. Oh, I don't know, the Rhineland mystics, Julian of
Hmm.
Norwich, or the Eastern Fathers, or uh, Benedict of Nursia. And um, I suppose I should say that from an early period, Aldous Huxley's anthology, The Perennial Philosophy.
Right.
I'm of a certain age when that was sort of something that everyone was aware of, that and the doors of perception. So it was, God, mescaline, the Tao, the luminous void. It all flowed together. Um, so yeah, I would say my much of my career writing about Christian philosophy and theology is the result of my engagement with Indian and Chinese and Japanese
It's very interesting.
religious thought. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you, I remember in fourth grade, having to do projects, and I chose like Confucius and the Buddha, and
Right.
in middle school. Then I did Japan and its religious traditions, and so I definitely
Now, how
sympathize
old are
with.
you?
I'm 36.
Okay, so you're probably a bit too young for Huxley or A.E. Burt to have been the standard texts of your youth, or D.T. Suzuki.
Yes, though I have read Huxley's Perennialist
Yeah,
Philosophy, of course.
yeah,
I think that's a really underrated text.
it is.
Yeah. Um, all right, so in your volume, you say you have an introduction, and you say that the Tao, it's not a thing or object, right? Kind of like how some analytic theists will perceive God, right, as another person, just like really great person. Um,
Yes, just an exemplary guy.
That's right. That's right. Really swell guy. You should get to know him. Um, and yeah, like kind of on the other end of the spectrum, like you have some in the scholarship who will say, no, the Tao is literally just nothing, right? Just complete absence of being, even analogical being. There's just pure nothingness, in all sense of the term. And so it seems like you kind of have a little bit of a middle ground view of where the Tao is not this personalistic God who's just like, hey, what's up, guys? At the same time, it's not just absolute absence of analogical being or being whatsoever. And so I was wondering if did you see your interpretation kind of like, it's the mean between these two approaches.
Well, the problem, of course, is all of our terminology becomes terrifically ambiguous on these things. In a sense, all classical theists would say that God is no thing,
That's right.
uh, because the fullness of being is not a thing among things or a being among beings. Now, in the Tao Te Ching, you don't have uh, a metaphysical grammar in the technical sense. But you are assured pretty clearly, on the one hand, that the Tao is not an object or something it's not, and it certainly isn't presented for the most part in personal terms, except that certain attributes that we would think of as personal are ascribed to it at times. It's generous, it gives.
Hmm.
Nonetheless, it's the productive of all things. It is also identified as the source of all things. So you can't reduce it to, well, what in what to an analytic mind would be nothing as such.
Hmm.
Um, it is no thing in that sense. But I mean, even without the worked out metaphysics, the Neoplatonic and
Hmm.
Aristotelian and Islamic and Christian and Jewish and other sorts of metaphysical terminologies that are very in varying degrees quite precise what they mean about well, what we might call the analogy of being, or not. It doesn't
Hmm.
provide us anything of that sort. Nonetheless, it's clearly saying that the Tao, in one sense, transcends any distinctions of that sort through it, and its emptiness is totally convertible with a sort of boundless fullness from which all things can forever pour forth. So I sometimes think that some of as you know, as you work in Asian traditions, there is a tendency also, of course, among scholars in either East Asian or South Asian studies to try to exaggerate the differences between the Western metaphysical or the Christian metaphysical traditions and those of the East, often in the direction of incoherence. And then there are those who will assimilate the paradoxical language of the Tao to, say, the paradoxical language of Majamaka, within that that school of Mahayana Buddhism, in which it's contested over the degree to which you speak of being in relation to sunyata and shunyata. So I mean, it's it is a matter of trying to sort through the ambiguities, but also through the prejudices of the disciplines and the prejudices of the academic clades. Um, you understand this. I mean, if in the past it was the habit of Western scholars to assimilate Asian literature all too quickly, or for that matter, to differentiate it all too quickly from Christian and other Western traditions. Now, out of some fear of failing to understand what's distinctive about it, or through some sort of intellectual colonialism or what have you, scholars tend in quite the opposite direction and are trying to assert, to my mind, differences that are usually exaggerated to the point of incoherence. So yes, long answer to a short question. I would say that the what you have in the book of Lao Tzu is already sufficient to make it analogous to
Mhm.
the analogy of being in Western
Right.
tradition.
Yeah, I think that fits really well with Wang Bi and his interpretation or his commentary on the Tao Te Ching as well.
Oh yeah, well Wang Bi. I mean that's a good example. I mean there you see, of course, since it's long before there could be any anxiety of assimilation. Um, and of course, at one time, that was our best text.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So you state, I'm going to read this quote so I don't misquote you. One might say that this is a work of metaphysical and spiritual monism, or at least of a philosophical and religious vision of the one and the many that assumes the real participation of all things in the divine or the celestial source, end quote. Can you elaborate on why one might say that, as opposed to this is just purely a political work or a text of earthly wisdom or kingly wisdom?
Well, of course, I mean, that's one of the old debates is the degree to which this is a manual of statecraft bedizened with metaphysical purfles, in order to make it attractive or to make it sound mysterious and authoritative. Because this already, apparently, at that point, the Tiandao, the way of heaven, is already sort of the general value that you will find. In fact, mentioned more plentifully actually in Confucian sources quite often than in Taoist sources, but the way of heaven.
Hmm.
And is it the case that this is just a pious periphrasis for this is how you get things done? And of course, the most recent finding of a text of the Tao Te Ching, the bamboo slips from
Hmm.
which were the caves that
Goodbye.
it's yeah. Um, it is an abridged version in a sense, in that it really does seem to be one that's been pared down to, for the most part, a guide to practical governance. And there are plenty of counsels in there for how to run a state, and a lot of them are pragmatic. If you don't force the issue, and if you remain out of sight, and you let it seem as if things are occurring naturally, even though you're guiding them gently towards a resolution, the effects will be more successful, the state will endure, and all that. And yet, that pious purfling is pretty immense in its presence in the text, and it's making claims that go far beyond the merely ornamentally metaphysical, or ornamentally spiritual but not religious, or however could have put it. Um, Emphasis on chi but not on the rights. I don't know.
Hmm.
And to me, it seems clear that yeah, there are definitely practical counsels there for princes, for kings. And it is a collection that I assume was initially made, because obviously I don't believe there really was a single author,
Hmm.
even if there
Right.
was a single Lao Tzu at one time.
Right.
Nonetheless, it is a collation. It was made probably with an eye to that first and foremost, as a
Hmm.
as a court offering. You know, when the Son of Heaven ascends the throne. But it's also a metaphysics. I mean, it just clearly is. It seems to me it's talking about the what brings life, what brings chi, vital spirit, where all things come from, where they tend to, why they're in harmony with one another when they're in harmony with the way of heaven. And I think trying to reduce it, and I mean, there's a pedigree to this. I mean, even D.C. Lau tended to read it as more practical than anything else. And he,
Hmm.
of course, probably is the best. His probably the best selling or the most perennially still selling edition in English because it's a Penguin edition, and therefore people just naturally grab. And of course, because penguins themselves are natural Taoists, so
Yeah,
there's,
that's right.
there's
They
something fitting
follow they
about it.
follow the way.
Yeah, yeah.
They follow nature. So I was gonna ask you if you could, so I just was kind of reading um throughout how you were translating things, and I just thought it would be cool to get a particular section of a chapter and just kind of walk us through it. What do you think it's saying? What, why you translated it that way, that sort of thing. So here I have, man, I forgot to put the chapter what this is from. I think it's like
I
around
think it's
40.
I think it's 42. You told me
42. Okay.
you told me in your last email it is something
Yeah.
like that.
Uh, so it says, Here the way begot the one begot the twofold begot the threefold begot all the myriad of things bear the feminine shadow upon the backs and carry the masculine sunlight in their arms. I mean, beautifully, like just poetically, just, very aesthetically pleasing. But I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about this.
Yeah. Oh, I see. I must have given you a slightly older version of the text because or maybe I didn't. The way begot the one begot the twofold begot the threefold. Is that what it says?
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right. Then you do have the yeah. You do have the current text. Yeah. Well, let me call up the Chinese if
Yes,
you don't mind. Let
please.
me see. I meant to have that open on my desk and I don't. But while I'm doing that, oh dear, this is rather embarrassing. I should have been better prepared.
Oh,
And
no, no worries.
so the I mean, those first lines to begin with, I think, give an indication of what I mean. They are the invocation of a metaphysical principle of the monism that all things begin with the one, or the saying, and I am doing my best to get to chapter 42 in the Chinese. And this is in the simplified script, which I do not read very well. I know the classical. So let me get the character here. There we go, the classical characters. So let's see. Forgive my pronunciation, and incidentally, I have an old brain, and I never conquered the tonal.
Yeah, so
Uh,
hard.
so yeah, I mean, but you do see there that the Dao Xing Yi Xing Xing San San Xing Wan Wu. Yeah, that it is already, I think, clear that even if we're not talking specifically of a technical metaphysics of emanation, nonetheless, that is the scheme within which we're working. There is a single principle, the Tao, from which multiplicity arises. But what's interesting to me actually is as you follow that along is this is the only place in the text where we have this direct juxtaposition of what, of course, becomes quite central in Taoist tradition of yin and yang, wan wu fu yin, bao yang chong qi wei he, which uh, talks about and yin is what I have there is sort of what is feminine shadow,
Hmm.
and yang is masculine sunlight. Um, because all of that is contained in this. Classical Chinese is such an inspissated and condensed, or all of those words that I've used come out to. Let me think. Let me look at these. 9 characters
Hmm.
in the Chinese. So, of course, one of the philosophies of translating for me here was not to attempt to imitate the concision of the original. There are those who do that and do it in some cases quite well. I like Red Pine's uh, translation, but I think it's best to avoid that because it becomes so concise in English that it becomes cryptic.
Mm,
Um, and quite often, I mean, I don't know exactly. There are very many different renderings of this. One seems to suggest that even this is a picture of how we emerge from the obscure, the obscure, the feminine, the yielding, the giving in the Tao, and
mm,
enter it. So the Tao, that darkness is at our back,
mhm, mhm,
and that we're striding forward or walking forward. So in order to embrace the yang, the masculine sunlight, the
mhm,
active principle, or whatever. Um, that may be how the image is to be read, but what it's clearly saying in the Chinese seems to me is that on our backs, at our backs, the shadow, this feminine shadow, is always there, and what we're bearing, what we're moving forward with, almost, I don't know if embracing or almost cradling like a child, is yang, and that these two principles are indivisible from one another because in us they combine in qi, vital spirit, which is the primordial, it's this chi yue he, this breath, spirit, that is vitality in life as such. I see it as analogous to similar terms in almost every
mm,
language, in Hebrew, and neshama, or ruach, or even nefesh, but spiritus in Latin, pneuma in Greek, atman in Sanskrit. This understanding of the breath of life as also the vital principle that is continuous between the source and what dwells in us, between the breath of God, the neshama Yahweh makes Adam a
mm.
living soul. Um, I don't know actually if I'm coming up with any grand commentary on this passage, but I think it's a good passage to choose simply because it captures so many of the spiritual
Mm.
mysteries of the text, the suggestive language of the text, but also the ways in which it's analogous to these other traditions, and the way in which the thinking of what the Tao is, and how we're related to it, and how all of the world stands in relation to it. It is very much like how these things are conceived in certain aspects of Christian
Yeah.
tradition, Muslim tradition, Hindu tradition, Jewish thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think the translation is a must-have, and really excited about it as we end. Oh, go ahead.
But wait, before let me just say this though. Thanks for saying it's a lyrical and lovely rendering.
Yes.
Because just for those, this I do want to make clear is the attempt being made in this translation is to be as faithful and accurate as possible to the Chinese, granting the obscurities in the text while also trying to give it the literary quality that
Capture
uh,
that spirit.
often rings through in the original.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it does that. I think so. Um, so as we kind of end, if someone's watching this and they're like, "Oh, okay, I want to kind of get into Taoist philosophy," what sort of secondary literature would you recommend them, or maybe if there's a some secondary literature that's really influenced you, what would you tell them?
Well, it depends on where they want to start. I mean, there are some good um, introductory texts to Taoism that tell of its history and of its texts. I know, but if I were to mention uh, those who've influenced my thinking on it most, A.C. Graham
Mm,
comes to mind, writings on Taoism, a great translator too. I think he's one of the great translators of Chinese poetry, but he of course did a translation of the Liezi
mm,
and other Taoist works. But uh, Mark Johnson, Uh, um, there's a Japanese scholar, Tanaka Koji, or
Yeah.
Koji Tanaka, I find very impressive. There's a Chinese scholar, Li Zehu.
Mhm.
Um, I was, though he considered himself principally Confucian, but as
Yeah.
you know, so there's we make these these divisions as if in the Eastern Asian traditions you really make these firm lines of
Right.
demarcation the way we do. Well, no, I'm a Protestant, not a Catholic. But Wingjit Chan,
Yeah.
or Chan Wingjit, but he went by the. Um, and some of the old, I just, even though they're not as scholarly and deep, but nonetheless they have a certain feel and character and a sensibility that I love, like that, Lin Yu Tang writing about it, things that are entirely out of fashion and largely out of print.
Hmm.
But there's a rich literature out there, and of course it also depends on again, we make a very strong distinction, or at least uh, in the academy we do, between philosophical Taoism
Right. Religious
and
Taoism.
the Taoism of the people. And the
Right.
latter, of course, is much more religious, more mystical in the in the sense of exercises and
Hmm.
rituals, but also more magical, more mythological. And if you're interested in that, that literature is different from the literature specifically on the philosophical aspects. My advice is to be aware of both,
Hmm.
to be aware of all. And as I say, they're good books. One that I wish I could recommend, but I can't remember the author of it. That I read recently is a history that tries to do justice to all these dimensions of
Hmm.
Taoism. And that would be my principal advice: is to try to understand both
Right.
folk Taoism and philosophical Taoism, because they're not discontinuous. They're not
Right.
identical. There are distinctions to be drawn, but that's true in any tradition. I mean, the high metaphysics of a Maximus the Confessor or a Thomas Aquinas is generally not
Hmm.
the Catholicism of the person in the pews, but neither are these two different
Right.
religions, two
Exactly.
different faiths. Yeah.
Exactly. And then, as you mentioned, with bamboo slips, the religious Taoist texts are with the Tao Te Ching and the philosophical texts, and it's like
Right.
maybe maybe they weren't so at odds, so there wasn't
Right.
such a sharp demarcation.
Right.
But
Yes.
thank you so much for coming on, and it's been absolutely lovely, and we really appreciate you and your work.
Well, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to all the adverse reactions I will get from scholars in the field. That's what happens when you translate. So,
That's
but
right. That's
yes,
right.
but I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
Thanks.